Eastern Oregon's very own talk show, only here on EO Alive.
Hey, EO Alive, thanks for jumping in with us today. It's a pleasure to be talking to Eastern Oregon tonight about this very valid topic. And it's a pleasure for me to have Dr. Stephen Hunsaker here with me from Grand Ronde Hospital. And Stephen, you and I spent some time talking in a forum a couple of weeks ago, and I really appreciated the way that you presented information. It was just awesome. And you have been on the front lines of COVID. You're responsible for the COVID task force, is that right, at Grand Ronde Hospital? And so I think that you've been inundated with it. So why don't we start there? Kind of, I don't know. Tell me about your you're a hospitalist at the hospital. Maybe explain just a little bit about what that is, and then when you first started getting whiffs that COVID was coming our direction, and how did you experience that? What did you think about that?
What was the first part of the question again, Brent? I was focusing on the second.
Yeah. Well, first of all, tell me what a hospitalist is, because some people might not be familiar with that term.
Okay. So I trained in internal medicine, 4 years in medical school, and then 3 years in residency to be an internist, which means I am a physician who takes care of adult patients. I don't do surgery. I don't take care of children, and I don't do OBGYN. I don't deliver babies. But if you're sick and in the hospital, there's a pretty good chance that you'll be seen by a hospitalist. They've been around maybe 20 years, 25 years in any sizable numbers, really. It used to be that internists and family practice docs would see patients in the hospital and in their office. And as medicine got increasingly complicated, and I'm happy to say more and more evidence-based, it really became hard to stay up to date on the entire field that is internal medicine or family practice. And so what happened is people just kind of carved out little niches so that they could focus more on on staying up to date and providing the best care in a limited set of circumstances. And the natural way to do that is just to have people that are in the clinics taking care of clinic-based problems, and people who are simply in the hospital just taking care of the super sick folks who have to be hospitalized.
And so part of that, if I'm understanding, part of that also was, so if you were, in years back, if you were a private physician, whatever that might be, and then you also had to be on call at some time. And so then, and part of that call is that if one of your patients was in the hospital, you were the physician that was responsible to go, or a physician from that practice was responsible to go check up on them, and so on and so forth. And that burden is a little bit relieved of those everyday physicians having to be on call, because in this particular case, there's a hospital physician who that's kind of your responsibility. You're there. I mean, what are your hours like when you are on duty? Yeah.
It's a schedule that I've done for over 20 years now, so I've gotten used to it. It was super hard and super easy at first, and now it's more just kind of okay for me. I work 7 days on and 7 days off. So the 7 days off are really nice as long as I don't have 5 days filled with meetings. The 7 days on are 12-hour days. I do have folks who cover at night, so I can get a good night's sleep. But 7 days straight, it's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and sometimes earlier and sometimes later. And then sometimes it's not quite so bad. It really depends on the volume in the hospital. So it's an interesting schedule. I wouldn't have ever picked it, but it's just the way it's kind of evolved. And I know some programs now are doing it a little differently than we are. But my partner and I are both pretty used to 7 on, 7 off, and it fits our lifestyle.
Cool. So, kind of tell me what the beginnings when COVID first started. I mean, was about a year ago now, right? When we started hearing about COVID-19 being in China and the concern about that, and so on and so forth. And what were some of the early indications? Did you have some that is like, wow, eventually this is going to find its way to little old LeGrand, and this is going to be something we're going to have to manage? I don't know. Maybe talk about your personal experience when you first began to learn about it.
Okay. When I first started hearing about it, it was just like everybody else. It was in the news. There's a really bad head cold coming out of somewhere in China, and more people are dying than should die. And so I was concerned, but I always listen to information that comes out of communist countries with a grain of salt. And I'm also very proud of the American healthcare system. I believe we provide good healthcare here. And so I wasn't all that concerned. But then one of our pharmacy doctors actually
I think we've had a connection hiccup here for just a second. We'll see if Stephen comes back. This is kind of the nature of stuff that happens. So we'll just kind of stand by here for a second. In fact, I think I'll show a video. We'll be back. All right, we're back. The age of computers, right?
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't shut down on me again. I'm really sorry. I apologize.
That's all right.
Where did I lose you? So I don't rehash a bunch of old stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think you were talking about one of the pharmacists, one of the physicians from the pharmacy started talking about COVID, and I think that's where you left off.
Yeah, she was really concerned, and she's usually a pretty calm, even keel person. So if Michelle's concerned, you better listen. So I checked out this website, and it, I was really concerned. This thing is deadly to the right people. And it's even more dangerous because in the majority of people who have it, they don't even know they've got it. They may not have any symptoms whatsoever. So they're walking around, breathing, exhaling tiny little vapor particles that are completely covered with these little viruses. And other people are inhaling them and catching COVID. And if they're in the wrong population, it's killing them. And they were talking especially about how many of their hospital staff they'd lost. Not only did they have an overwhelming number of patients coming in, but half of their nursing staff was sick, and 10% of them or 5% of them may have died at particular hospitals, and the fatality rates from what should be a common head cold were just higher than you would expect, and certainly several times higher than influenza. So at that point, I wasn't the only one seeing and reading about these things. Several of us at the hospital got together and said, you know, we're going to need to take this seriously because this thing is so contagious, and to a specific population, it's going to be so devastating that we're a tiny little hospital. And if we end up overloaded, there's a good chance that most of the other hospitals in this region are going to be overloaded. So we're not going to be able to send people away. We're going to have to be the ones to take care of them. If all the hospitals in Boise and Cadillac Hospital in Tri-Cities and Bend, if they're all full, where are we going to send folks? So we really did put together a disaster plan. It was kind of what's the worst case scenario and how are we going to deal with it? And folks at GRH were working with folks at the county health department, and even reaching out to folks over in Salem. So we were able to put together the right teams, and we were isolated enough so that we had enough time to get as prepared for this as we could possibly get. And you can never be completely prepared for a disaster if it happens. But if you give me a month to prepare for it, my response is going to be better than it will be today. And so in that way, I felt like we were really fortunate in the fact that it didn't get here for quite some time. And I think, as I've said before, I think that's a testament to the actions of a lot of the people around here, but it's also a testament to the fact that living here in Eastern Oregon is the right way to live, because we're not living in super dense urban sites. And so it's a little more difficult for it to spread to hundreds and thousands and millions of people in a short period of time. So we have that natural advantage anyway.
So once you learned more about it, do you have some kind of a description that you can help, an illustration of how COVID works? I mean, how was it different? You know, once you learned about it, how was it? I don't know. Talk to us.
How was it different?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I've said, it comes from the same family that you get the common head cold from. It's just a different tiny mutation in the same family of viruses. And this one, in some people, and we still haven't figured out exactly how to tell which people it's going to affect and which people are just going to carry it and not have any symptoms. But if you're in that group of people who are going to be severely affected, basically what it does is it ramps up your own immune system 10, 20 times worse than it should to respond to an infection. And so you end up releasing all kinds of infection-fighting chemicals and things called cytokines that have pretty devastating effects. These things are designed, kind of simply put, to be sprayed onto an invading virus or bacteria and eat away at them like an acid would. And so you can imagine a little bit of that stuff goes a long way. And if your immune system gets hyper activated and now you're getting a lot of that stuff instead of just a little of that stuff, then you're basically attacking your own body and poisoning yourself. And it's just that immune system that's gone awry. And one of the drugs that we use frequently to deal with an immune system that's overactive or inappropriately active is a steroid. And our usual bag of tricks didn't seem to work for this one. The steroids didn't seem at first to be having the kind of effect we'd all hoped that they would have. Now, in the interim, there's been a really well done study out of the UK that showed one specific steroid at a actually fairly low dose, given for a 10-day time period, does seem to have some beneficial effects in folks who have severe COVID infections or responses, if you will. But the effects are really body-wide. We're seeing damage to people's hearts. They get what we call cardiomyopathy. The heart muscle cells get inflamed. I've seen people develop congestive heart failure over a few days and die. We've seen people have strokes. We've seen what we think is probably going to turn out to be long-term damage to the brain, similar to the damage you'll see in folks who have severe dementia. It certainly causes scarring in the lungs, and it messes with your blood clotting cascade. There's a cascade of events that happens every time you're injured, and it's basically just automatic reactions that lead to the formation of a blood clot. And if that cascade gets disrupted, then you just start forming blood clots everywhere. And you can have blood clots go to the lungs and die. Blood clots go to your brain and you'll die. Some people are losing arms, legs, fingers, toes, noses to blood clotting. It's really devastating. The number of ways it can kill you are innumerable. But I would say if it's going to kill you, it's probably going to be in one of your weak spots anyway. So if you already have COPD or emphysema, it will make it worse. If you already have heart disease, if you already have diabetes, all of these things think of them as weak spots in your armor, and that's where it's going to get you.
So, and I'm sure that there are folks out there, and I want to remind the audience, this is your opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Steve, and we'll funnel those to him, those that are appropriate, and we want to be able to answer the questions. And I'm sure there are folks out there like, all right, already, we've been hearing about COVID and how awful it is for the last year, and literally that is. And you know, I mean, the but is, yes, it is awful. The but is that, but it attacks severely a small group of people, you know, I mean, so, and I know that early on the hospital, I mean, you guys did your job. You did research, the county did, you guys, to make bandwidth for whatever the disease that you had, that you thought might be coming. You know, the hospital stopped doing elective surgeries for a while and so on and so forth. So there's a huge amount of preparation, and the county did the same thing. You guys did what you were supposed to do, but in the end, the wave didn't come exactly the way that we thought it would. I don't know, maybe speak about that a little bit. So you had this information about it was coming, how damaging it might be. You know, how did that come down to the practical side of what you actually saw?
What was the last part of that question again, please?
Yeah, how was it? How did it practically, when it finally got here, how did it present itself to you?
In waves, peaks and valleys. This thing is really contagious. So somebody did one thing that we all wish they hadn't done, and went to a gathering of a bunch of people, and suddenly we've got a few hundred cases. And so then we saw a big wave of people coming into the hospital. And then we didn't have any more of those events for a while. And then somebody decided they wanted to go to Las Vegas. And they went, and they came back, and they exposed a certain number of people that unfortunately were the ones that are going to get really sick. And then we'd see another wave. And so really every time we were unfortunate enough to have somebody make that kind of decision, and sometimes it was for perfectly valid reasons. Life is life, and people have to make a living. And I'm certainly not passing judgment on anybody, but I am saying that these waves happened as a result of people being exposed to other people who had it and then bringing it back to LeGrand. And I know everybody's tired of hearing it, but I'll tell you what I'm tired of hearing. I'm tired of hearing that grandma just died and grandson got back from Las Vegas a week and a half before she died, where he went down to see his friends because he was tired of this COVID thing. Well, now grandson gets to live the rest of his life knowing that he's the reason grandma got COVID and died. And that's what I'm tired of. So.
And that's a really good point. And I appreciate you making it so well. So now we're finally in this vaccine possibility. Last time you had a great illustration of how the vaccine works. Can you explain that to us again, Steve, and talk about how that does? Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, because this is my jam. When I heard about this, I was just like, this is so cool. And I think that a lot of the concerns and fears about a vaccine can really be allayed if someone gets down to the nuts and bolts and really understands, hey, what is it we're trying to do here? What are you putting into my body? And then just expecting me to believe it's going to make me better. How is it going to make me better? Prove it. And so the analogy I used last time was that this vaccine, you should think of it as a little packet of blueprints or architectural plans that get injected into your body, and they get taken up by your muscle cells. And there's some tiny little factories within each muscle cell that are designed to make proteins. And this vaccine has the blueprints that factory needs to make the protein. And I've got some very simple illustrations here. But if you can see that, think of that as the protein that your body is making. This is not COVID. It's not related to COVID in any way, shape, or form. It's just a protein that some muscle cells in your body will make for a while after you get the vaccine. Well, this protein starts floating around, and it's foreign, and your body's immune system recognizes it. And once it recognizes it, it breaks it down, and then it makes a whole police force of cells whose sole reason for existence is to float around in the body and hunt for this protein and kill it. And by now, the vaccine's out of your body. It's gone. But you have your own police force looking for this protein. So now the question you're going to ask is, big deal, why do I want to have an army looking for this protein? Well, the reason is, now that you have that army running around looking for that protein, then someone coughs and you breathe in a COVID virus and it comes into your body, this is COVID. Yes, it's actually a plastic egg with a bunch of ibuprofen tablets taped to it, but you get the point. It's coated with this protein. So now your body's hunting these down and killing them. So that's how the vaccine works. And the only question now is, how long will it last? How long will that police force exist? For some things in your body, you just get one vaccination, you're good for the rest of your life. For other things, you need boosters. The thing that comes to mind is tetanus. You know, every time you step on a nail or cut yourself on a barbed wire fence and go into the ER to get sewn up, the first thing the doctor asks is, when was your last tetanus shot? And he probably gives you another one anyway, because it isn't going to hurt, but it just might help. Because believe me, you don't want to die from tetanus. If you want to see some scary stuff, get on YouTube and look at some of the videos on there of people dying from tetanus. It's horrific. Well, I'm telling you, dying from COVID is horrific, and this vaccine ain't gonna hurt, and it's probably gonna help an awful lot.
So one of the questions that we have gotten, and you kind of answered that, is, do you think the COVID vaccine will become a yearly vaccine, kind of like the flu? And I think the answer is we don't know yet, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me though. This mutates pretty rapidly. I mean, we're already seeing different strains. So that's the question I have in my mind. This new strain coming out of the UK, is our vaccine going to cover that? We don't know yet. I certainly hope so.
Yeah. So for those people, and I'm sure you hear a lot. I mean, and you referred to last time, you have family members. You grew up in Baker City. This is home for you. I'm sure you have friends and stuff that say, well, yeah, but this vaccine is based in that. I don't know. Maybe talk about for a minute some of the misconceptions that you've heard and why they don't make sense.
Correct. Well, actually, this gives me an opportunity to apologize to my mother, because she was not too happy with me for throwing her under the bus last time. So, Mom, I'm sorry. The rest of the story shall be told now. I talked about how she resented wearing the mask and didn't understand it. And then I explained how the mask doesn't catch coronavirus, but it does catch those little tiny water droplets that you exhale. And those water droplets have the majority of the virus that you're exhaling. So in that way, the mask actually does help. It's not 100%, but it's certainly better than not having anything. And what I failed to let everybody know was that my mother then was very thankful and said, I understand now, and I will wear my mask with much less resentment. In fact, you should tell that story tonight, because I think it'll help people. And I just left all the beneficial stuff to Mom off. So sorry, Mom.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And we all know that you got to make sure Mama's happy. So thank you for straightening it out. Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity. I want some more lasagna. So
that's right.
So I know that there are a lot of really outrageous stories out there. Some are just sensationalistic and just, purposefully put out there to try and frighten people or spread disinformation. But not all of them. Some of them are, potentially valid. And a lot of fears around vaccines. If you look around the world throughout history, there have been some totalitarian governments who have used these kinds of things for nefarious purposes. I don't think the United States of America is doing that. That's my personal feeling. And if you do feel that way, I don't think I'm going to convince you otherwise. But I can tell you that these people who are working on the vaccines and the people who are taking care of patients around this country are really motivated to get people vaccinated, because in our experience, we know that's going to help more than anything else. And the risk for it is lower than the risk of driving to Baker and back on a snowy day, quite literally. We know people do have some mild reactions sometimes to these, and very rarely. Some people have some severe reactions that are short-lived and treated in a hospital. I haven't heard of anybody dying from getting the COVID vaccine. And the number of people who have any symptoms is actually really very small if you look at the number of people who have gotten the vaccine so far. So I would say it is overwhelmingly safe.
Good. And so who, if there were, some people are asking, who shouldn't get the vaccine? I mean, are there particular risk factors that you wouldn't recommend?
Yeah, and when you go to get the vaccine, there'll be a short questionnaire that you fill out that will address all of those risks to make sure we don't accidentally give someone who shouldn't get the vaccine a shot. And they're, for the most part, they're pretty simple. I don't think we're giving it to pregnant women yet. The CDC has informed us that it is safe to give to women who are intending to get pregnant, but I don't think they're enthusiastic about giving it to people who actually are pregnant right now. And certain people who are allergic to very specific components in the vaccine. We can't just put mRNA into your arm. It has to be diluted in a solution. And very rarely, some people who are deathly allergic to things like eggs or one of the polysaccharides that they're using to suspend the mRNA in solution, those people probably shouldn't get the shot. But really, other than that, there's no reason. Go down and get your shot.
So we've gotten quite a few questions about, and this may or may not be in your realm, and I don't think it is, but a lot of people are wanting to know when is the vaccine going to be available for those 65 and over? And unless I'm understanding correctly, the Grand Ronde Hospital is still, you guys are just doing what the state is telling you to do. And so they're giving you an allotment of vaccines. You are vaccinating the people that work for you and that you are responsible for. One, is that correct? Is that still the situation?
To the best of my understanding, yes, it is. I know that daily administrators are having meetings with public health department officials. And last time I was on, we kind of talked about the tiered list that came out of the public health department that kind of said, who do you vaccinate first, and how do you break down groups of different people. And so we've followed that guidance. And I know that everyone at Grand Ronde Hospital is willing and anxious to help in any way that we possibly can. But the one running the show is the public health department. They're the ones who are organizing it at the national, at the state, and even at the local level. So as far as where and when, that information will come from the public health department. I don't have it. But if the public health department needs, I don't know anybody at GRH who wouldn't pitch in one way or another.
So for those people that might have had COVID and gone through it, do they need to take the vaccine also?
That's a very good question, and one that a lot of us were asking. And the CDC did come out with some guidance on that. And what they recommended was that you get the vaccine anyway, even if you know you've had COVID. And the reasoning behind that is that the theory is if you've had COVID, then you're going to have antibodies, and so you should be immune. But again, even with the vaccine, we don't know how long the immunity lasts. And I'd hate for someone to get COVID a second time because the natural immunity only lasted for 3 or 4 months. And the vaccines that will give you immunity for, hopefully forever. But as I said before, it wouldn't surprise me if we had to get booster shots periodically. So just to cover your bases, be as safe as possible, get the vaccine anyway.
So a nuts and bolts question that people are asking. So if you have a patient that you're treating actively for COVID, do you give them the vaccine? Should they get the vaccine? I don't know. Talk about the treatment and when the vaccine comes into place there.
Yeah, I guess that's a very good point, and that would be a person who would probably be on the do not give list. I don't foresee myself ordering COVID vaccine for my active COVID patients. I would say we would typically want to wait until they've recovered.
Because your priority when you have a patient, and I'm speaking for you and you can confirm this a little bit, your priority is to treat them in their current whatever's going on with them currently. And that may or may not have anything to do with how the vaccine works. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely. In fact, the way the vaccine works is also kind of interesting in that you have to have two shots. The two big companies that we're using here, at least in the Western United States, are Pfizer and Moderna. The Pfizer vaccine has to be kept at an extremely low temperature. And you have to have a shot, and then 21 days later, you have to have a second shot. And about 2 weeks after that second shot, you have about 95% likelihood that you're immune from COVID. With the Moderna, the shots are 28 days apart, and they, again, give about the same 95% protection from the Moderna vaccine as well. But it takes a couple of weeks after the second vaccine in order to get as high a likelihood that you're immune as possible. After the first shot, people are only around 52% likely to be protected from COVID. But after that second shot and your body's immune response to that second shot, then you're about 95% likely to be immune.
So we're getting some comments, staff people that work with you and at the hospital, and they're giving you the attaboy and way to go and encouraging you. And so we really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, speaking for us and being here and answering these questions. What do you see as kind of so the vaccine comes, do you see us, and again, this, if this is extending your knowledge, you can just say so, but how does when are we going to be out of the woods? Do you have a sense of when we're not going to have to wear masks anymore? Are we going to be even with the vaccine, are we going to be in this funky place for a while?
I guess the short answer to your question isn't never. It's never soon enough for us to be out of the woods on this and to have this behind us. I'm so tired of wearing a mask. I have not ever realized how bad my breath is, how often. And I drink a lot of coffee, and I got to tell you, at 3 p.m, tasting old coffee in my mask it's just not pleasant. So I hear you. I think it's going to be months and months before we're back to normal. I think we are at the hardest part of this whole journey. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet, and it's going to take months.
Do you think that once people have the vaccine, that they need to wear a mask anymore? Does that alleviate? I mean, and I know these are really practical questions that people, this question is coming soon. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the right and strictly accurate answer is to say no, someone who's had the vaccine should not have to wear a mask. The practical answer, dealing with populations of fallible human beings, is that there's no way to know for sure who's really had the vaccine and who hasn't. And if you want to keep the people who are potentially infectious as controlled as possible, if you want to keep the number of infections as low as you possibly can, then those people who have already been vaccinated are going to need to wear their masks until we reach herd immunity.
Yeah. So, wow. Anything else that you can think of? Maybe a common question that people ask you that you've wanted the opportunity to explain.
Well, it's not that often anymore that people ask me, is this thing really real? I think enough people have seen enough heartbreak and tragedy so that the vast majority of reasonable people do accept that it is real and it is dangerous. And it is not political in any way, shape, or form. It will kill you if you're a Republican just as fast as it will if you're a communist or a liberal Democrat. Um, so there is no protection in politics, and anybody who tells you otherwise is lying. Use your common sense. You know what it's like to get the head cold. You know how to decrease your chances of getting the head cold. Decrease your chances of getting the head cold. You do it. Don't rely on somebody else to do it for you.
Yeah. And it's stuff, I've said this many times, it's not that complicated. It's not that hard for us to do. And it's not hard to stay home when you're sick. I mean, it might affect you, but it's just, yeah, these things are doable.
Mm-hmm.
So
it just gets tedious when you've
Yeah.
asked people to continue doing them for months and months and months and months and months. So I get it, but we have to.
So looking back on the preparation that the hospital made and the meetings, and was there ever a time where you felt worried about being overwhelmed, or
Every day?
Yeah, every day. Wow.
Yeah, I get up every day and I ask, and I wonder, did we get 6 or 7 admissions, and is this the beginning of another wave? Every day.
But thankfully, and I think Jeremy said this the last time we were together, that you haven't had this huge glut that maybe you worried about. But what you're saying is, what you're worried about is that if 7 come in one day, what is in 5 hours from now, are we going to have another 7?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's what they saw in China. That's what they saw in New York City.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, a lot of people who get severe COVID but live don't leave the hospital for a couple, 3 weeks.
Right.
And so you can imagine, even if you only have 1 per day, if they're all going to stay 21 days, pretty soon you're overwhelmed. And, that doesn't even take into account staffing. I can't tell you how hard the people at the hospital have been working. Half-staffed departments still just did their jobs. And you worry, how long can people keep working at that pace, keep putting that much energy into their job before they just fatigue and either get sick or quit.
Yeah. So maybe talk about the staff that you've worked with a little bit. I mean, maybe give them an attaboy, give them a shout out for how you think they've done. I'm sure that they would appreciate it.
Well, I've been really pleased and very proud to be a part of the team at Grand Ronde Hospital. I feel like everybody took this seriously. We had people in different departments that didn't have anything to do with the hospital coming to us and saying, how can I help? Have you thought of this? The administration, the nursing managers, the nurses, the environmental services folks, the ones who keep the rooms clean so that the patient after a COVID patient doesn't catch COVID. All those people stepped up. The pharmacy department was running at half staff for a while, and patients were still getting their medications. Everything still worked. Everybody just stepped up. They just did their jobs. I'm so tickled that we have such a strong group of people over here. It's an honor.
You and I talked before we got started how that you worked to get back to Eastern Oregon. You worked.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you were anxious to find a place at Grand Ronde Hospital. Is there ever? I mean, are you still pleased with that decision? Are you glad you're here?
People who work with me will roll their eyes when I say it, but I frequently say, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to do it. I ain't leaving. This is where I want to be, quite honestly. It's going to take a crowbar, dynamite, maybe a small atomic bomb to dislodge me from this place. I love it here. I mean, I have some property out of Elgin. I shot an elk on my property with my brother this year. I shot a white-tailed deer with a black powder rifle with my brother on my property this year. I am Eastern Oregonian through and through.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Steve, for being with us tonight. And I just appreciate you taking the time. I can see the dedication and the seriousness of it. And we need to hear that. We need people occasionally to speak bluntly to us and be local people. I mean, Eastern Oregon folks, they don't want to hear from someone 300 or 400 miles away. They want to hear from people that are right here in the trenches and that are working on our behalf. And I really appreciate you taking the time. Anything you want to say before we take off?
Hi, Mom and Dad.
All right. Well, thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Eastern Oregon, for tuning in. Appreciate Dr. Stephen Hunsaker for being here with us tonight. And we will see you next time right here on EO Live. In fact, tomorrow morning, Kyle and I have a live show called AM on EO Live right here at 8 a.m. in the morning. And